day for good reason. It's hard to even think about Genesis or what all is happening there. But the more I got to thinking about it, the more I thought, there's some really good stuff that's worthy of discussing and worthy of sharing. All of His Word is, and we know that to be true. And now more than ever, we need to grasp that we need His Word always. And that's where we are to go when things do get hard. So I thought number one, I would briefly go through this and just kind of discuss chapters, 30 through 47. That's a lot of chapters. And this would keep us on track. And maybe we could even get a little bit ahead eventually, because it is really hard if you are on the same schedule as I am, where we're in Exodus and then now we're going back and discussing Genesis. I've had to reread and refresh myself on what's going on here. So let's just dive in. Genesis 30, we're talking about Rachel. And Rachel gives her maid and I'm just going through my notes. Okay, so Rachel gives her maid Bilhah to Jacob. So we have that same example as we've seen before, where she kind of takes matters into her own hands to have her children. So this is like a surrogate. Bilhah has two sons. Rachel sees this as like, it's almost becomes a competition between Rachel and Leah, and you see that. And it's not I want to have children, it's I want to have more children and be better than you, because Rachel is kind of the chosen and the one that Jacob loves the most. And Leah, so there it becomes a competition, as does many things with siblings, right? So then, now, in my notes, I have to say I have a lot of and thens, because we see a lot of really wild stuff in this reading. But it says, then Leah gives her maid Zilpah to Jacob. So Rachel gave her Bilhah and Jacob, and then Leah, because she is quit bearing children, gives her maid Zilpah or whatever to Jacob, because she has quit bearing. And then Zilpah gave Jacob two sons, Gad and Asher. Again, Leah's son has mandrakes, which are said to increase fertility. And then we have a sixth son, Zebulun. You see anything there? I don't think so. So then Leah hoped for her sixth son would make her husband love her. Like, that's kind of what this is all about. She's thinking that this is going to be the one. This is going to be the one that makes Jacob love me more. So then she had a daughter named Dinah. Now here, then God remembered. So it does say that. It says God remembered. I didn't notate what verse that was, but anytime we have that, we've talked about that and discussed that. I always make note of that. God, don't forget. This is a call to action for God. This is God taking action in His Word. So God remembered Rachel, and God is about to do so. So that means we know that God is about to do something big. Then Rachel bore a son. So she finally does bear a son, and his name is Joseph. So that makes 12 children for Jacob. So then Jacob was blessed by an increasing flock. So we see the flock thing and the really weird spotted sheep or lambs, and it's weird. Okay, and so anyway, but Jacob's flock does increase. And might I add, I found it very odd and almost disturbing that then Jacob says, after all that, and his flock is greatly, and he says, God blessed me. Like, I can't even remember exactly what the words were, but anyway, he talks about that being a blessing of God. Now then, you weren't being real truthful there. Like, you weren't, and now you're going to say that's a blessing from God after you doing all that trickery and all that stuff that you've been doing. Anyway, but we do know that God blesses Jacob. But in that same note, I did make some notes here that God blesses Jacob, and He does. But He doesn't bless Jacob because Jacob was good, or because Jacob did good things or accomplished great tasks or was a great follower or did all these things. But he blessed Jacob because of the promises that God made to Jacob and the covenant with Abraham and Isaac. It was because God was faithful in that covenant and in that word, and that is where Jacob's blessing comes from. In the same way, and I loved this, in the same way, blessings come from the Lord to us. And it's not anything that we do or anything that we can do or accomplish. And trust me, this is something I really struggle with because I'm a doer of tasks, and that there's nothing that I can do. There's nothing that I can accomplish that will get me more blessings from God. But it's God's covenant made with us through Jesus and the promises that he's given us in his word. So it's that same covenant there that's where our blessings come from. It's not through works or through great things that we do ourselves. So then we go on to see Rachel and Leah agree for once, and they both say to Jacob on over that whatever God says to do. So they both say that. Whatever God says, Jacob, whatever God says, that's what you need to do. So they leave Canaan. Leah, as she's leaving, goes to her father's household and steals his gods. This is an odd story, too. We don't know Jacob seems to be changing on over into chapter, and I'm flipping over here, but over into chapter like 40s, somewhere in there, we see Jacob kind of start to change. We see a change in Jacob. So, and he talks about destroying all the gods that they worshipped, because they were going to worship the one true God. So it made me think back about Leah stealing her father's household gods and why she would have done that. And it made me wonder, did her and Jacob somewhat worship these gods themselves? Was she trying to protect her father by saying, like, you don't need to worship these gods? Was she trying to get her father to come after them? So she stole them so that he would come? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but y'all can comment and maybe we can discuss that. But what I do know and what we do see is that in all that, maids being surrogates and children and arguing and competition between Rachel and Leah, we see that in their perfection and in their sinfulness and in their wrongdoings and trying to do things on their own, God still continued to show provision and bless them. So that is a true hope for us, because we sure don't deserve any of it. We all deserve death, but God continues to fulfill his promise. And just as he did here, his covenant with Abraham and Isaac, and he still continues to provide. So then we go to Genesis like 32 through 34. Jacob's going back to Canaan, and this is where Esau is. So then you go on down. I'm going to skip around a little bit. I'm going to skip that part, and then I'm going to go to where Jacob wrestles with God. Now, I read some commentary. Actually, some of the commentary I read talks a lot about a theophany, and this is an actual appearance of God on earth. So Lisa, help me with that, or somebody that can. But that seems to be what has happened here, because Jacob doesn't wrestle with him in his mind like, oh, what should I do? I'm wrestling with this thought in my mind. He wrestles because he leaves with an injury. He leaves injured. This seems to be a physical wrestling, or wrestling, as we say. So then we see God rename Jacob Israel. So Jacob and Esau meet and seem to get along and agree to leave together, but Jacob goes west to Canaan. So they're like, hey, let's go. We shall leave. And then Jacob ends up going west to Canaan. And then here, okay, so Jacob in the past, we've seen him go to this place and he builds a pillar and then it's a name, and he builds a pillar and it's a name, and we named it this, and this is what it is. Here, this is kind of one of the first times where I see Jacob maybe making a change, he leaves towards Canaan and he builds an altar. He's honoring the God whom the very one he just wrestled with and is now injured because of it, and he builds an altar. So then we have another story. We see Dinah. Dinah is raped, and then Simeon and Levi kill all the males through this circumcision. Hey, you must be circumcised. All of them get circumcised, and they rescue Dinah. So then let's move on over to Genesis 35 through 37. This is just okay. So 35 and 37. This threw me off because it talks about Jacob's name being changed again. I think, okay, so in Genesis 1 and 2, we see God created man, God created man. Like we see stories repeated. So is this an instance where this story is just repeated? Hey, God, remember, don't forget, God changes Jacob's name to Israel. I don't know. But anyway, that happens. I think that's in verse 10. So anyway, Jacob and family prepare to move out of Shechem, which I think is probably the best thing they could do. They tell his family to get rid of all the gods. See, this is where I was talking about. This is where we start to see a little bit of a change in Jacob, because he tells his family, we must get rid of all the gods. God calls Jacob to Bethel. So, and there in Bethel, I believe, is where he built another altar. I read some commentary on the name change and the way it's used back and forth throughout Genesis. Even God calls out to Jacob and he says, Jacob, Jacob. And that's after he had already renamed him Israel. God calls out to him and says, Jacob, Jacob. So I was like, so anyway, I dug a little deeper. And this is not, it said, one commentary said that when they refer to him as Jacob, after that point, after he's been renamed, that it's actually, so Jacob is referring to kind of the old person, Jacob, the sinful, the self-indulged, the self-centered man that Jacob was. And that when he calls him Israel, that's referring back to the man that Jacob is becoming. So, and I thought back and I looked back at it, could somewhat be pretty accurate, really. Was changing Jacob. So anyway, then guess what? Rachel has another baby, Benjamin. She dies having Benjamin. And then Jacob loses his father Isaac. So then chapter 36 is the whole genealogy. Genealogies are hard to read. And we tend to kind of skim through them or skip over them. I tried to make myself read it and take note of names. And the reason I did that this time, I thought back because as we go on over Tamar has Perez and Zerah. Anyway, Perez is an ancestor of Jesus. If you look at Matthew 1:3 and Luke 3:33, you will see that why can't I say that word today? Genealogy. So Perez is a direct ancestor of Jesus, which is super cool. So sometimes, well, all the time, the genealogies are there for a reason. And let me just read through these notes. Joseph is the first son of Rachel. Seems to be a favorite. Joseph has a dream about his brothers serving him, which infuriates them, and they plot to kill him. Poor Joseph. Then Reuben saves him. Joseph is sold to the Ishmaelites and the Midianites, whom then sell him to Potiphar. Now, through all this, Jacob thinks that Joseph is dead because of the evil brothers. Here we continue to see God working, using imperfect people to fulfill his perfect plan. So we don't always see. Like even us, we're reading this and we know this is God's plan because it's the Bible. Like that's His plan. But I don't know if you're like me when you're reading through this and you're like, my goodness, what are we doing? What are you thinking here? Like what in the world? And I think it's just a revealing of imperfect people being used to fulfill God's perfect plan. So even Potiphar, I mean, my goodness. So Leah, Genesis 38 through 40, Leah's fourth son, Judah. Judah finds a wife from among the Canaanites. Not supposed to have it. So they have a child, E-R, not U-R. Spell it U-R one time. But anyway, and Tamar are married. Then God kills because he is evil, wicked in the eyes of God. Okay. Then it gets interesting again because the culture at the time was that the brother of the deceased would then go into the widowed wife to provide a child to her to help take care of her. But the child would carry the late husband's name to carry on his namesake. So, Onan, don't know if that's how you say that either, Anon, whatever, goes into her, but emits on the ground. Skipping along. This displeased the Lord, and he killed him also. So Judah says, wait until my son, Shelah or Sheila, whatever, however you want to say that, is grown. But then Judah didn't want to give him to her because it says, lest he die. Like the other two have died. So he's like not wanting for that to take place. Then Judah's wife dies. Then Judah goes to shear his sheep, and Tamar goes up to where he will be. Judah thinks that she's a prostitute, goes into her, gives her his signet and cord to hold on to until she can get the goat. Tamar gets pregnant. Judah says she is to be burned, but then she pulls out his signet and cord, and he says she has been more righteous than I. So then Tamar has twins. There we are. Tamar has twins, Perez and Zerah. And Perez is a direct ancestor of Jesus, which is very cool. We start to see this. We start to see God's plan, and it just Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and we're seeing all this, and Joseph and Judah, and anyway, and God's plan is we're headed in that direction. So God took the son, this ungodly situation, and put him in the family line of the Messiah. And that was definitely an ungodly situation. But truly, what an amazing example of grace. God chose them, despite their works, to be both in the line of the Messiah and to have their role in God's plan of redemption. So chapter 39 goes back to Joseph, skipping around a little bit. Potiphar owns Joseph. Potiphar is an officer and also a captain of the guard, a very high up person. I learned really something interesting about officers. I shall not share, but if you want to know, let me know. In 39, 2 and 3, God is with Joseph even more. By Joseph's trust in God and diligent work and blessings from God, Joseph showed even Potiphar that God was real. And shouldn't we do the same? I mean, here we see it's just these stories seem so, or this record of what happened seems so outlandish and so crazy. And the more you study it, the wilder some of this stuff is, and we see, but it's like through all of it, and I just think so much, and I guess that's why I wanted to bring it today. It's just not everything makes sense to us. Not everything comes together like a puzzle to us. Sometimes the pieces are just scattered and we don't understand them, and we can't see it come together. Like we can't see the full picture. But God, He sees it all. And if we have trust in Him and faith in Him that He's in control, it is such a peace. It is such a peace. And then, we read through all this crazy stuff and it's been so crazy. And I'm just like, what in the world? And then I'm like, but God's peace. God's blessing is just through it all, and He's working His plan, and He's using such imperfect people to work that plan. And I hope that, like Joseph, I hope that when I'm doing my work and I'm working and I'm doing all these things, that it's not for my glory, or it's not me working my way, into, I want to earn these crowns. It's not that. That I pray that my focus is always that I'm just doing God's work. I'm just working for God and God's plan, and I can stay focused on that even through, you know, all the things that we go through, the hard times, but that others would see that difference that Jesus makes in our lives by the way we live and work. It's just, I don't know. I felt like, maybe somebody needs to hear that. Uh, that's where my notes stop on that particular section. But and I think there may be one. There's some more. That was chapter 39. That was not even through 47. So anyway, this has been a really long video, and I didn't mean for it to be, but I love y'all so much. I have loved our large groups, and the discussion that has taken place, and I pray that it will continue, and I pray that everybody will come to a place of comfort there in the large groups, and just it's just been a true blessing. So I pray that that we will continue to stay in His Word, that we will be disciplined to stay in His Word, because the further we go and into, sometimes we lose that momentum and that encouragement to continue forward. So I pray that we will just continue to stay in His Word, continue to learn, help each other learn, um, catch each other up when we're behind, encourage each other to stay on track, um, all the things. So I love y'all, and I'm praying for everybody as we go through this next week, as it will be very hard. And I'm very thankful for our service this morning. It was such a blessing. So, anyway, I love y'all, and I will see you soon.